Ex-Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's revolutionary mini-budget was announced. Many in the party and beyond celebrated the first truly conservative budget in a generation. But now that Liz Truss has blown up her flagship economic policy to appease the Tory wets, there are fears that the failure of Trussonomics has killed off low taxes and other libertarian economic policies for good. Well, former Conservative minister, current MP Sir John Redwood, who worked under Margaret Thatcher and has been one of Liz Truss's closest allies for years, joins me live. And John, I know there's so much noise, obviously, around all week, but one of the most important things I think about the failure of the mini-budget and the so-called death of Trussonomics is that it seems to mean that Treasury orthodoxy, something that I know you have been speaking out against for some time, could be here to stay for another generation.
I don't think I agree with all of that. I mean, first of all, I haven't been a close ally of Liz Truss's over the years. I supported her in the leadership campaigns. I liked what she was saying.
She likes you, though, John.
Wished to see.
But, John, she likes you, and she has been very clear to many people who I know that she considers you someone who she listens to on the economic front.
Well, that's lovely, and I have always liked her economic views. I'm just saying we weren't close pals over the years, but I supported her leadership campaign, and I thought what she said made a lot of sense. I think it was a great pity that, for one reason or another, Kwasi launched a third of a budget. He told us about tax changes, but because there hadn't been time to do all the preparation for one reason or another, he didn't do the spending. He therefore wasn't able to tell us about the borrowing consequences, and he wasn't able to complete the package of necessary reforms to speed the growth rate. And it would have clearly been better if they'd done the whole thing as a rounded package, which is what I wanted them to do, and they now agree that they should have done the whole thing as a rounded package, and we await the complete package under the new Chancellor at the end of this month. I don't agree with you that this kills off the idea of lower taxes. The idea of lower taxes is popular and powerful, and it's right for certain economic circumstances. I would urge them to look again at some of their tax rates. I think they are too high, and I think you need lower tax rates as part of a good growth strategy. And we are at that very important point at the moment where inflation is too high, and yes, policy has to address high inflation. But the coming threat is recession, and recession will clearly purge the inflation completely. But if you overdo the forces of recession, you get worse evils. You get higher unemployment, collapsing incomes, and instead of controlling the deficit and the borrowing, which is what they say they want to do, you'll end up with more borrowing. You'll have forced borrowing because in a recession, your tax revenues fall away. As people earn less money, fewer people in jobs, companies make less profits, less is spent for VAT, and your public expenditures go up because you have more people on benefits and more costs of collapse and disaster. So I am urging them to challenge those in the Treasury and OBR who seem to think that there must be a very sharp tightening in economic policy today, taking the form of both higher taxes and lower spending. Because I think this is exactly the wrong point in the cycle. And if they, by their Treasury orthodoxy, create a long and deep recession, they will end up forcing us to borrow a lot more, not a lot less.
But that's what's going to happen, isn't it? But isn't the issue, John, that as a result of these mistakes, there has now been an absolute return to the power of Treasury orthodoxy? I mean, look at the people who Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, has appointed on this almost sage-like economic advisory group. You know, they are people who absolutely represent Treasury orthodoxy.
Well, that may be right. And I and others will obviously be saying other things to Jeremy Hunt. And I will make my advice very clear through your programme, through my website and all my usual ways of doing that. And I am pleading with them now to understand we have to fight recession as well as fighting inflation, and that the OBR model is not really dynamic enough. It doesn't seem to take into account the fact that if you correct the deficit too quickly with tax rises, you end up with a bigger deficit and more borrowing because of the impact that has on economic activity. This economy, like several in the West, has just been badly hit by what is effectively a massive tax rise, and that is the huge increase in energy. And it is literally a tax rise because a lot of that extra energy cost takes the form of tax revenues that are collected by Qatar or by Russia or by the other suppliers of the energy that we import. And so they're taking money off us, which we can no longer spend on creating prosperity and jobs, and giving it to the tax revenues of other countries. So it's very bad news. That has to be offset. Now, the government knows it has to be offset, so it's come up with a plan to provide some supplements for people facing very big energy bills. But I think it needed to do a bit more, and that's why I supported the original trust proposals on specific tax changes. I also think in this very competitive world where quite a few economies are going into recession because they're all being hit in the same way, we need to be super competitive. We need to be very attractive, because if we're going to attract and keep the footloose international companies here, we need lower tax rates to attract them. And if we're going to allow the companies already here to invest in all that extra capacity and new jobs, which is what growth is all about, again, we need to tax them less so they have more of their own money to spend. Because growth sounds a bit techie and economic talk. But what is it about? It is about individuals having the chance of a better job. More people are unemployed, having the chance of any kind of job. It's about small businesses being able to expand and have the money to invest. It is about our country growing more of its own food, making more of its own goods, and producing more of its own energy. That is the way you make people better off. You give them more choices. You give them a better lifestyle. That's what I believe in. That's what Liz believes in. And we don't want that swamped by people who wrongly tell us that now is the time for big tax rises and public spending cuts. They've been wrong in the past, and very often it's based on wrong forecasts. 2 years running, the OBR greatly exaggerated the amount we would have to borrow, and I remember calling them out for being wrong. This year, I thought they underestimated it. Unfortunately, I'm going to be right again, because their next forecast is clearly going to be quite a lot higher than their original one. But they shouldn't overcorrect and then produce such a high forecast for the deficit that it forces the Chancellor into tax rises that we don't want and would be damaging.